After an underwhelming performance on Sunday, the future of the Houston Texans is a conversation that needs to be had. Whether that's player or coach, we will break it down on the other side. But first,
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
welcome in everybody to today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, your team every day. Of course, I am John Hickman, followed by my boy Cody Davis. Super excited for today's show. We are free and available on all major platforms. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Locked On Texans and like, subscribe, comment on the YouTube page. Cody Davis, I'm going to dive right into it. The conversation surrounding David Culley and whether or not, I'm not going to call it a hot seat, but is he on the way out? Is he going to be granted another year? And I opened up today's show with the cold opening with the underwhelming performance on Sunday, because I want to dive into it at some point in the show. However, his future, how is it looking with the Houston Texans, Cody, in your eyes? And let's talk about that.
Well, according to The Athletic, David Culley will stick around for the 2022 season. The news broke last night. Well, not really last night. It broke after Sunday's loss to the San Francisco 49ers. And John, I find it kind of ironic that we are sitting here 1 week removed after you and I had the discussion on what the Houston Texans should do with David Culley, because as you remember, we were kind of split down the middle on whether or not we wanted to see him return for this upcoming season. But like I just mentioned, David Culley will be back as the Houston Texans head coach. And John, listeners and viewers, I'm looking at this from three different ways. First and foremost, of course, I kind of believe that David Culley did earn the right to come back, because like I mentioned last week, and I'm going to reiterate the same point, when you look at all of the nonsense, when you look at all of the drama that took place with the Houston Texans, ever since the calendar flipped to January 1st of 2021, and as a matter of fact, we could go back a little bit further, because majority of the Texans downfall that we've been talking about for so long, kind of started taking place in the early part of 2020. But when you look at the drama from players not wanting to be here, of course, there's still the Deshaun Watson factor that is still hanging over this organization, from the Jack Easterby nonsense to even Nick Caserio on what the hell is he doing, whether or not he's making plays or not. David Culley has been, for a lot of these players, been like a shoulder that they can lean on. And actually, part of the reason why we have seen a handful of guys go out there every single Sunday and give it their all, because, yes, upper management might be failing them in a sense, but David Culley, because he has gained the respect, because he has gained the trust from a lot of those guys in the locker room, it's part of the reason why we have seen a lot of guys each and every Sunday go out there and give it their all. So that's one aspect that I'm looking at this. Two, and most importantly, I think this kind of showcase where Nick Caserio and the Houston Texans, how they view the 2022 season, which is another point that I made last week on if your top priority is to continue to develop your young guys, especially with the guys that you're going to bring in the 2022 NFL draft. The development of these young guys is still going to be a top priority for the Houston Texans moving forward. Now, what I will say to that point, that does not mean that they're going to be one of the worst teams in the league in 2022. But at the same time, like we heard Nick Caserio say, that the progression of young guys like Davis Mills, Nico Collins, I'm even throw John Grenard in there because he be entering his third season. That is still the top priority in the hopes of getting the Houston Texans on a successful rebuild. But three, and most importantly, John and listeners, and John, you can let me know how you feel about this. I'm wondering how much of the Houston Texans' decision to bring back David Culley is basically due to the fact that, yes, the Houston Texans did kind of did kind of like prove a lot of people wrong, because a lot of people thought that there was going to be the first 0-17 team in NFL history. But when you take a look at other head coaching job around the NFL, I'm wondering how much of the decision to bring back David Culley is simply due to the fact that the Texans still cannot get a legitimate head coach to come here and coach the Houston Texans. And look, right off the top of my head, you take a look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, they have Trevor Lawrence. And of course, they're looking at a replacement after Urban Meyer. You take a look at the Chicago Bears, they're looking at somebody that could take over and lead their young quarterback in Justin Field, because I'm pretty sure 9 times out of 10, Matt Nagy, he has to be gone. And
of course, they already announced it.
Exactly, and another team like the Las Vegas Raiders, after the whole nonsense with John Gruden, those are 3 head coaching jobs that I can see a real legitimate. And what I mean by legitimate, there's no shot to David Culley, but I'm talking about like a real good head coach. I can see them taking over those jobs before coming here to the city of Houston, to where, yes, Davis Mills has shown some promise, but at the end of the day, you still have to deal with the nonsense and the foolishness of the Houston Texans upper management. And of course, that has to do with Jack Easterby. Of course, that has to do with whether or not Nick Caserio is actually making calls. So, I'm happy for David Culley that he is getting a second chance. But John, listeners and viewers, if they are giving this man a second chance, I'm hoping that they actually let him make the calls as the head coach. Because part of the reason why we have seen the Houston Texans turn things around over the last 2 to 3 weeks is because he has started to get a little bit more responsibility as a head coach, versus earlier in the year, it seems like he was just a name out there.
Well, I do want to say and kind of refute your claim of whether or not Houston is going to be, I guess, a top candidate team for a lot of the top candidates. The Raiders and other teams that you named, they're going to have to fill those positions, but this is still the NFL. And if you want to move on from a head coach, there's always, and I do mean always, someone out there waiting for their opportunity. It's part of the reason why we got David Culley, I think, here in Houston. But I think overall, when I look at this situation with David Culley and the Houston Texans, do I think he's the best option right now at head coach? I'm going to stand firm on no. However, I'm going to stand even firmer on I'm not a fan of 3 coaches in 3 years. And if we throw in and look at the interim part with Romeo Crennel, the Houston Texans had in the last 3 years, if they move on, Bill O'Brien, Romeo Crennel to end out last season, and then now we're looking at David Culley. If they move on, that'll be a 4th head coach, a 4th philosophy, a 4th scheme. Like, it'll be too much. And look at the players they drafted in their time frame that's been affected by that. Lonnie Johnson, John Grenard, Ross Blacklock, some of these players who maybe have shown promise or shown not to be as good as we may have wanted them to be, they are still part of this team. They've all been affected by that. We look at John Grenard. Houston had a terrible time last year getting sacks. John Grenard comes out this year with 8 sacks, and he's missed some games, right? So I don't want that to linger on until year 3 or year 4 for some of these guys, right? I'm not a fan of that. And to give you guys some perspective on how that's bad, it happened to the Jags right in our own division. Jack Del Rio was fired in 2011, 2012 season. Mel Tucker took over to finish that season. The infamous Mike Mularkey 2-12 season, and then the Gus Bradley year. So they had 4 coaches in a matter of 3 years, right? That didn't turn out good for them. And look how they drafted. Look how everything turned out for that franchise during that point of time, right? Also look at the Lions. They've had 3 head coaches in the span of the 2020. 2 were interim coaches, and now we look at Dan Campbell for the 2021-22 season right now. Not a fan of that, man. That brings so much inconsistency that your players and your foundation, and we're looking at this team that has quote-unquote culture, not issues, but trying to rebuild this culture, that's going to be affected as well, right? So I'm not a fan of that. And I also want to look at this one question that David Culley was asked about how much does this last game influence the offseason? His response was they need to go out and play the game the right way. And then he ended with Nick and his staff. Didn't include himself. So I'm wondering if this last game for him is something that he needs to win, right? I'm looking at that perspective. Does he need to get win number 5 against the Tennessee Titans, who you beat before? I'm sorry, you didn't beat them. They did beat the Titans, right? They beat the Titans before, early in the year. He mentioned in that press conference that they did a lot of things and they're still doing a lot of things. Remember, the Houston Texans had 4 turnovers in that game. So I think this is a very important game for him to win so he can kind of get a little bit more, I guess, a sigh of relief going into the offseason as to why I should get another year. The guy previously had all of this talent, only won 4 games. I went into this year with a lot of uncertainty, roster, a coaching staff, and I won 5. This is what I think I need. This is why I think I need to come back compared to removing me for the next year. But overall, 3 coaches in 3 years, there is not a formula of success when you look at that in the NFL. You need some type of consistency. Texan fans, I have an incredible app, the Get Upside app, which I just mentioned. We're making up to 25 cents for every gallon of gas every time we fill up. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now for you Android users. Use promo code touchdown for NFL or score for college and get a bonus 25 cents per gallon on your first fill up. So that'll be up to 50 cent cash back. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Get cash back using the Get Upside app. And again, just download the app for free and use promo code touchdown for NFL or score for college. Welcome back, Texan fans, and thank you for making the Locked On Texans your first listen every day. Again, we are free and available on all major platforms for podcasts and YouTube as well. Cody, as we sit and talk about the future of David Culley and whether or not he should be brought back, and one thing that I mentioned was the consistency factor for this franchise, not necessarily for him, but for the franchise. And I also look at a player in Justin Reid, and I'm going to bring up that word consistency. I think he's a player that my stance has changed on. I was okay early in the season with the Houston Texans moving on from him this offseason. However, I look at a couple of games and I look at the entirety of his season so far, and I'm looking at a lot of different things, changes that were made the last few games, and I can't wait to talk to you guys about why Justin Reid should actually be brought back for the Houston Texans. Number one, the game versus San Fran, he did allow 1 pass for 29 yards. But since the Rams game, which was week 8, Reid has only allowed 98 yards. Prior to the Chargers game, where Reid allowed 69 yards on 4 completions, Reid passer rating was only 39. He only allowed a 39% passer rating. He's cut down on a lot of those missed tackles. And here's Reid's numbers compared to one of the top safeties in the league, and still is Minkah Fitzpatrick. Reid has played 13 games. Minkah has played in 14 games. 50% completion percentage, 230 yards allowed, 16.4 yards per completion, 72 passer rating, and 2 TDs, both of which came against the Jacksonville Jaguars in week 1. Now, when I look at Minkah, he's allowed a 68 completion percentage, 394 yards allowed, 11.6 yards per completion, and 88 passer rating and 2 touchdowns, right? So they allowed the same amount of touchdowns. Minkah is a better yards per completion percentage, but everything else is in the side of Justin Reid. Now, what has helped? The consistent running mate play. They benched Lonnie Johnson. We know that. We was all up in arms. We wanted the young kid to get out of there. Lonnie Johnson was benched week 9. Eric Murray struggled in week 9 and 10, but since then, in the last 5 games, only allowed 89 yards on 8 completed targets. When I look at Lonnie Johnson, before the benching through week 7 of the NFL season so far, he allowed 326 yards, 15 completions, 22 yards per completion, and a 78 passer rating. Cody, I want to give you credit where credit is due because you mentioned a few weeks back that Justin Reid is a player that needs consistency from his running mate. And do I think Eric Murray is a high priority player? Absolutely not. But I will say this, the defense as a whole has played better in the last 5 games. Eric Murray has played better in the last 5 games. And with that being said, the smart, dependable playmaker that Justin Reid can be, the big hitter that he can be, that has showed in the last 5 games. When I look at this offseason, Do I think safety is a need for this team? Absolutely. You cannot go into the 22 season with Eric Murray at safety. But Justin Reid should be there. And I'll say this one more time. If you get some competent running mate play that can be consistent for now 18 weeks through 17 games, Justin Reid, who I still think is a tier 2 safety, but when I compare his numbers to some of the top safeties in the league, he is right there or maybe even better in a lot of categories. Get this man somebody he can play with for the next couple of years. I don't think his contract extension will be a lot of money. I think Houston will be able to save some money with him bringing him back in the future. But my stance on him has changed. Ladies and gentlemen, Justin Reid should be a Houston Texan for the foreseeable future.
To be honest with you, John, I don't think Reid coming back to the Houston Texans will be up to the Texans. I think it's going to have to do more so if Justin Reid himself wants to come back. And I say that because, look, yes, first and foremost, let me say this. I'm actually hoping that Reid re-signs with the Houston Texans because he is one of the most underrated, underappreciated players in this league. And I do believe he actually has another level that he can go to. And if he stays healthy, and if, speaking of consistency, if he stays in Lovie Smith's defensive scheme, I think we're finally going to see Justin Reid take that next step. However, John, yes, the last 2 to 3 weeks have been really good for Reid. But what I don't want to lose track of, and I don't think this is going to happen, the last 2 to 3 weeks of the season where the Houston Texans had their 2-game win streak, and even in the games that they did lose, which I think it was the Seattle Seahawks game, they did look somewhat competitive, at least in the first half before the wheels came off. There has been a lot that's been going on with Justin Reid, and I have been told that there is a high possibility that he does not and will not come back unless the Houston Texans, of course, franchise tag him, and he's not a guy that's going to sit out because he doesn't want to come, or if the Houston Texans overpay him and he just can't say no to the money. And when I take a look at his injury history, I do not want to see the Houston Texans commit that much money to a player where every other week it seems like he's getting nicked and knack, and you don't know if he's going to be available in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And as of right now, we don't even know if he's going to be available for the season finale because he is now on the Houston Texans COVID list. Now, with all that being said, when I take a look at Justin Reid, one of the main things that he really has an issue with, not only does he have the issues of the inconsistencies that the Houston Texans have been given, but you have to remember that Reid is one of a handful of players who are still left under the Bill O'Brien era. You talking about a guy when he got here in 2018, he thought he was going to be a part of something special. He thought that he was going to be a part of a team that is going to be consistently in the playoffs, that's going to make a championship run or whatever the case might be. He wanted to be a part of that team. As we know, over the past, 12 to 24 months, that is long gone. And Reid does not like the direction that this organization is going. And of course, you also got to remember, one of the last straws that determined whether or not Reid wants to be here in the city of Houston was that stupid suspension. And I have been told that that was the last straw for Reid. But like I say, unless they overpay him or franchise tag him, I do not expect Justin Reid to continue his career as a member of the Houston Texans. But I want him to, because if they allow Reid to walk out the door for 610 and Kirby this offseason, they're going to have a hard time trying to find his replacement.
And I think that's where the issue comes in at, right? I mean, I look at the draft as hit or miss. That's what the draft is. We look at the Oakland Raiders, right? And they've drafted in the first round with good picks how many years? And they're still struggling as a franchise. We look at the Jacksonville. Exactly. We're just about to bring them back up. Like, we look at the Jacksonville Jaguars and how many first-round talents have they drafted and they missed on, or things didn't work out, or they just left their franchise because of the poverty that their franchise is in, right? And so it's a big hit or miss. I'm not a fan of, if you have a player that's worth keeping around, letting that player go going into the draft, because now you're looking at another position that needs to be filled. Now, I do remember the suspension, and I understand where Justin Reid is coming from. And I look at his situation as a tier 2 Safety, I think the highest safety right now makes $17 million. I'm going to check that out really quick.
No,
No, it's
I'm not bringing
15 from
Reid back.
Justin. It's 15 for Justin Simmons. He is the highest paid right after Buda Baker. But John Johnson for the Rams, he's at 11.25. I can see Reid getting around 12.5 or 13.5. The cap does kind of go back up this year. I just believe that if you're going to look at this situation for the Houston Texans, you already lost out on your star quarterback, right? The situation in relationship with Laramie Tunsil, nobody's really sure how that's going to end up this year. He may be out the door. He may stick around. Who knows? That'll be something that we look into. But if you want to keep somebody on this team that fits your culture, that's smart, really smart, like on and off the field, I don't think you can move on from Justin Reid with at least not trying to mend that relationship and getting a contract that makes sense not only for the player but the franchise, right? And like I mentioned, when you put somebody next to him that can play some good football on the consistent basis, that's when you get the best version of Justin Reid. He's played in 13 games this year. He's had a suspension, and I want to say he's missed a game already due to COVID. So if those didn't happen, he'd be playing in 15 out of the 17 games. Injury hasn't necessarily been an issue for him this year. He's got banged up in some games, whether he returned or came back. He would have been in 15 games so far. I think he's a player that you cannot miss out on, not because he's just one of these, generational talents at safety, but how much do you want to work on refilling his position? Because you went through that in the last couple of years. You had to refill Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson, and that didn't work out. You look at the situation with Deshaun Watson. It maybe worked out for your future, considering the past. The last time we saw him, he only won 4 games, but you're also in that position now where that was something that you were sold on. You gave him that extension. Now, the next couple of years, you're going to be back in QB purgatory, which may leave you in QB hell. We don't know. I don't think he's a player you want to just move on from without trying to fix things if you know you have other positions on this team that needs to be filled.
Well, like I just mentioned, he holds the power on whether or not
he does. Remember,
he
guys,
stays
Justin Reid
here
is an unrestricted free agent. Right. And Justin Reid is an unrestricted free agent for this upcoming year. So he does hold the cards. And when I look at franchise tagging, does Justin Reid get $15 million? Is the Houston Texans okay with that? I'm not 100% sold that they would give him $15 million to franchise tag him. BetOnline has you covered this holiday season with more props, more odds, and more lines than ever before. As football continues its march through the college football bowl season and pro football playoffs, BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports action this season. BetOnline head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code Locked On to receive your bonus. BetOnline is where the game starts. Guys, thanks for making the Locked On Texans your first listen every day. We truly appreciate it. Be sure to check out our next episode on Wednesday. Now make your second listen to Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all of your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q, with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available on all platforms.
Good job, brother. I'm sorry. We wasted one of your years. I'm sorry. You should have 11 wins. Good job.
The reason why I played that clip, John, and listeners and viewers, yesterday marked the one, I guess I'm going to call it the 1-year anniversary of J.J. Watt and Deshaun Watson walking off. And John, I just felt the need we needed to just bring it up really quick. Only because, look, it's crazy how much things can change in a year, because I think at the time when we saw that clip, we knew that was the end of J.J. Watt here in the city of Houston. But what we did not know was that was also the last time we also see Deshaun Watson playing for the Houston Texans. And, which is crazy because today marks the last time we all had an opportunity to talk to Deshaun. And I just remember him sitting there and they was asking him, what direction do you want to see this organization go in? And he just said that, I remember one of the things that will forever stick with me. He just said that there are too many people in this organization that thinks they have power and they don't. and we all need to get on the same page. And the main thing he wanted to see was leadership. Now, after Deshaun Watson walked off of that Zoom press conference, we all know everything that happened with Nick Caserio coming in, him demanding the trade, Culley, his off-field legal issues, and of course that gets us to where we are a year ago. But John, it's just crazy. A year ago on yesterday, J.J. Watt, Deshaun Watson walked out of NRG Stadium as a member of the Houston Texans for the last time.
Yeah, man. I kind of joke with the Boys to Men, the Boys to Men song I just said sung out, but you know, if we're looking at that situation, I think it was it was unprecedented, right? And you just look back months before that clip, get the extension, and you can kind of understand that J.J. Watt, he's out the door, his age and where the Texans were at the last time we saw him in that jersey, that didn't match up. But with Deshaun Watson, you look at him as a player who is, I still, regardless of what's going on off the field, I believe he's a generational talent. I believe whatever team that he eventually plays for, if he plays in the NFL again, and he was trying to work out a settlement between, I want to say 18 out of the 22 women not too long ago. So he is preparing and gearing himself up
for the
this
trade deadline, actually.
Right. So he's trying to get that taken care of. Whatever team he plays for, they're going to be a plug and play. He's going to have success, I believe. But I don't really care about Deshaun in this case. And I'm not saying that because he's a millionaire that's going to get back on his feet. And this is probably the first time that I've said this in a while. It's more so the fans, man. Like, I scroll through, I'm always in them Texan Twitter streets. And I scroll through all the time. And I can kind of understand why some fans may still hold on to Deshaun Watson being in that jersey for Houston. You look at since 2022, the amount of quarterbacks that have played for this team that has been very underwhelming. You finally get the guys some people have been, maybe figuratively or, hypothetically praying for. In Deshaun Watson, we need a quarterback. You finally get him. Rick Smith jumps up to go get him. And then 4 years down the line, this is what's happening. And this is why this is happening. And there's nothing that anybody can do about it because his mind is made up. That is what that video signals to me. Like, that is the last time a lot of fans had hope in this team. Now, granted, some of you guys need to move on. Some of you guys need to stop calling these radio stations or stop going off on Twitter and stop attacking people because of this one man that you may have not even met before, right? This is their life, living your life. But at the same time, I kind of understand him walking off that field, seeing 99 and seeing 4 and 99 J.J. Watson.
And Charles Amini, who was lurking in the background too. So
right.
Throw him in there as well.
And that was the last time, one of the last few times we saw Chuck out here in that jersey. He's having, some success with San Fran, but they did waste one of his good years, plain and simple. And whether it was Anthony Weaver and him being a piss poor defensive coordinator, or just not necessarily saying piss poor, but inexperienced, maybe in over his head. Maybe we look at Bill O'Brien, who's the biggest culprit, the entity himself. However, when you go and have a season like Deshaun did, and you only win 4 games, I can't remember too many quarterbacks that have great seasons like that, and they don't win some at least more games, right? But it's not about Deshaun. I think it's more so about the fans. I will say this, that video should be the video that reminds you that life moves on. So move on.
But it depends how it moves on. That's the
right.
issue. Life moves on, but sometimes it can move in the wrong direction. And, depending on, because we have seen promise in the draft class of 2021 from Mills to Jordan to Collins to Lopez to Wallow, it kind of makes it just a little bit more easier to watch that video. But John, everything that you just said about Deshaun Watson, one, it kind of proves my point. Like, yes, they did wasted one of his years. They ended the season at 4-12, and it's something that you and I talked about, I think, a month ago. Give Deshaun Watson this defense, and I'm pretty sure the Houston Texans in 2022 are going to win more than 4 games, because a lot of those games, 10 out of the 12 was one-score losses, and the majority of those came due to the transgressions of the defense. But that video, at the end of the day, and yes, I'm a reporter, I'm not a fan, but it hurts. It sucks, because as we sit here on January 4th, 2022, we should not be sitting here talking about the possibility or being happy about the possibility of Davis Mills leading this Houston Texans team to 5 freaking wins.
But that is the reality, and I think people need to be when you look at folks around his teams, fans, the pissed off fans, the fans that understand the reality of the situation is, instead of looking forward to the next decade of Deshaun Watson, or in his jersey, you need to start looking forward to the next decade of Deshaun Watson playing for somebody else, but maybe you reaping the benefits of the trade that you got back for those first round picks, because that's what's going to happen for Deshaun Watson. So move on. Cody has, a lot of people have, but some of you guys have to move on. Thank you for checking out today's episode of the Locked On Texans. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Locked On Texans, like us on Facebook. Also, take those thumbs, go over to YouTube, subscribe, like, and comment as well. The Locked On Texans podcast, that's where you can find us. Follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12. Again, that's John_Hickman12.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, that's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.
Thank God we didn't waste one of your good years.